Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I am joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Mackenzie.
Hello.
And Alex.
Howdy.
Howdy ho, neighbor. We're here with the part 2 of porn and sex addiction. That is the subject that we are tackling the second week now. Alex, you had an opportunity. Actually, Alex and Rachel had an opportunity to sit down with Nate and Sharon from CityCare Counseling. How do you feel that went? Was it good?
Yeah, I think it was good. I think people are going to have a chance to listen to some good stuff. A few things I learned about them, and they'll share that a little bit, is like that they are literally licensed sex therapists, counselors. They'll give you their official title. But it seems like obviously this is a big problem, but there's not a lot of people actually licensed in this arena that are actually dealing with these kind of addictions and things like that. And so to have them at CityCare and to have them really a part of our network here at Christ Community is a huge win and a huge blessing, and hopefully a resource people take advantage of as they're listening to this, that they're not just like us giving opinions, but these are people that are dealing with this day in and day out. Mm-hmm. Sharon will share a little bit about her story, how she got into it, and really how she has a lot of empathy towards women that have gone through this. And so I think it's a great resource, and I'm excited for people to listen to their expertise. Mm-hmm. Well, today we're joined here by two great people that are counselors here. So if you don't know about Christ Community Church, we've got another building called The Porch, which is home to something called CityCare, which is just a great resource for us as a church. I know for me as a pastor, as I've sat with people and done my mini counseling sessions with people to hear people's stories, and to have a resource like CityCare to send people to get professional help and counseling and find hope and healing is such a blessing for me as a pastor here at Christ Community. So and I've gotten to know both of you through various kind of things. We shared a roommate way back in the day, Nate, and Sharon. It's been fun to get to know you in other occasions, and so we're thankful to have you guys here to talk about this topic of sex addiction, pornography, all those kind of things today. And so, first of all, I just love to take turns. Maybe we'll start with you, Sharon, just to tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, give us an intro to you, and then Nate, you can jump in there, and then Rachel and I will bounce back with a few questions and hopefully land the plane with some great application. So there you go.
So I'm assuming you want me to tell you how I got into this?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about you, how you got into this. Were you just like bored one day and like sex therapy? That sounds like a fun thing to study.
Hardly. So I was married about 22 years when I found out my husband had been sleeping around for about 20 years.
Wow.
And it was devastating. And talking about from the women's point of view, it really is a betrayal trauma. Women who find out about things like this, it's like mood swings and anger, and we just feel crazy, and people think we're crazy. No. It's a really hard time. And I guess I want to, before I go further in my story, I would like to say, because when I say that I was married 22 years and found out about this, that puts fear in the heart of women to hear that, to think, oh, one day I might find out. So I guess I want to say there were always signs, but I never knew what the signs were, what they meant. But I knew that there was something not right in the marriage. And so I don't know that I need to say anything more about that, but it's not like it's just we had this happy marriage and then suddenly one day everything fell apart, you know.
Yeah, so you didn't like get in this because it was like a childhood dream. It was like literally from your life story. It was kind of like a career change, or like
it's like God prepared me for this. And I think He does that. I think He uses pain in our lives to show us things and then to use it to help other people, and that's kind of where I am
Wow.
I am a certified sex addiction therapist. After he left, after the divorce, I had said, okay, Lord, who am I? What now? And so I went into counseling. So I haven't actually been doing it that long. And then had the opportunity to go into sex addiction therapy. And it's been a really good fit for me.
Yeah. The amount of empathy, I guess, that you would be able to have as you sit across the table or chair from people. Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that part of your story, so thanks even for sharing that, and I think that brings a lot to it.
You're welcome.
Cool. How about you, Nate? What's your story a little bit?
Yeah, so I've been a licensed counselor for about 10 years, and it was actually a former client that talked me into getting the certification. It was someone that had struggled, and he said, hey, I think you'd be good at this if you thought it might be a good fit for you. And so I said, oh, yeah, I'll check it out. And as I looked at my caseload, I noticed that there's a lot of guys coming in here that this is a part of their story. May not be the main reason they're in here, but it's a pretty tragic part of what we see coming in the door. So that was a big part for me of checking it out. And, of course, Sharon was already doing it. And so as I was talking to her about it, she's like, yeah, go get trained in this, get certified.
And at the time, there are not very many certified sex addiction therapists in Omaha or Nebraska, and at the time it was mostly women. And so I thought it'd be a really great thing if we had some men, because a lot of men are not comfortable talking to women about this.
Yeah, I think at this point I might be the only male in Omaha that's certified.
Wow.
There might be some other people that have been working on it and getting their certification, but I think for right now, I think I'm the only one outside of Keaton Kleiner as well. He's a associate's certification, I think.
Yeah, so he's also here at CityCare, right?
Yep.
So two guys at CityCare that are. What does that mean? Like, so to have the certification in sex therapy, or what is it actually called? Like, what does it take to get this? Just a brief thought on that. Like,
yeah, so it's the acronym is Certified Sex Addiction Therapist.
Okay.
The training is actually like 120 hours of on-site training. So we travel to a location, and each place has a couple of trainers that walk us through like a 4-day ordeal. A positive ordeal, I should say. And then after that, we have about 40 hours of supervision. So that's connecting with other professionals in the field, and they watch over our caseload and make sure we're following protocol and the way it was designed and researched.
wow. Yeah, it seems like a big hole.
Yeah.
One guy, and not a lot of people in Nebraska to have that, but probably a lot more people in Nebraska dealing with this, struggling with it than you guys can even handle. So
Yeah. One of my favorite things to talk about with different topics like this is like the science that kind of goes behind like how people think and how it impacts them. So I kind of just wanted to ask, how does like porn kind of impact your brain, and how, it might kind of rewire the way your brain works, or I don't know. I just kind of wanted to know the science behind what porn does to you when you're watching it.
Well, I think it definitely impacts your brain. Actually, even physically, they have found that high porn users have less gray matter in their brain.
Oh, wow.
And then, of course, there have been studies on narcissism, and they've given people test inventories for narcissism, and people who watch a lot of porn tend to score higher on the test for narcissism. So it very much impacts the brain. It impacts the relationship. It impacts the wife, because so often the wife feels like, well, I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. It really does say to the wife, you're not enough, I need something else. And maybe the wife doesn't say that because she's feeling insecure, and so she may not say that, but usually there's these feelings of insecure, and that is not good for a good, healthy sex life. I mean, you don't have a good, healthy sex life when people are thinking they're less than.
Yeah, and this concept is arousal template, and so this is sort of like a sexual worldview. So the experiences you have growing up, and when you hit puberty, when your arousal or excitatory system comes on board, what you do with that, it's going to matter in what in how you consume things. So, for example, the brain essentially leaves a map or breadcrumbs for things that are good. So the more you do something, I think you probably heard it said, fire together, wires together. Essentially, the more you do something pleasurable, it's going to create a map that says, hey, I want to do more of this more often. And so the more that you do it, the harder it is to stop it if it's an unhealthy behavior.
Yeah, and probably the younger you do it, as your brain is young and developing, the more that, with the gray matter and all those kind of things, the more developmentally your body thinks it needs this to continue to go on, and probably where some addiction is created, which you guys can talk about a little bit. Yeah.
Actually, in adolescence, like if you start early, in adolescence, the brain actually prunes itself. So it prunes back neural pathways that are not used.
Wow.
And so if I'm spending my time doing porn and not spending my time making mistakes in relationships and learning how to be relational, then those neural pathways that are more about relationships get pruned. And so then there's this social anxiety, and it's like, it's just more comfortable to go watch porn.
Yeah.
And not only that, a lot of people think before they get married, oh, I'm being faithful to my wife. I'm just doing porn and masturbating. And so I'm being faithful to my wife. But the truth is they are wiring their brains to that porn. And so when they get into marriages, not only do they not stop looking at it, but they find it often more exciting than their wives.
Well, and that kind of answers my question a little bit, but just about maybe being desensitized to some things. Like if you continue to watch it over and over again, does that get them to be more desensitized and maybe start to lead to different pathways? I don't know if that really happens with porn as much.
Yeah, so there's this concept called the Coolidge effect, which is basically you need novelty to increase that high. 'Cause you build this tolerance, you're able to watch it more, and you get to this place where you have to watch it a whole bunch, or you have to up the ante and start watching something that's maybe a little more risque, which means you're hijacking different neurotransmitters, different chemicals, and adrenaline, norepinephrine. If you're starting to hijack those things, which come along with anxiety, it's going to heighten the experience. So you have guys that will start watching something that seems pretty innocent, so to speak, and they'll get to a place they never imagined. And I think that's the shocking part for guys sometimes, is say, I don't know how I ended up here. This is devastating.
And then you have the overwhelming shame from that of where I have gone. And shame is something that tends to push people toward more addiction. And so it becomes just a terrible cycle and hard to get out of.
Yeah, and I would imagine, like I went to a Bible college and grew up in a very purity culture type of thing, and we've talked about that before, where sex outside of marriage is like this ultimate thing, ultimate sin that you shouldn't create. And we, as a youth pastor for a decade, it's one of those things that we try to perpetuate as like purity and what that looks like, and a lot of times it comes down to just don't have intercourse outside of marriage and stay a virgin, and then you're going to have this promised land of a great marriage and all these things. And I've heard people, colleagues and friends talk about, hey, this is safe because it's keeping me away from like sex outside of marriage. As a high school student or as a college person, I can watch this because I'm not actually interacting with anyone. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm saving myself for my wife. And so I can get my fix, but also stay pure and be able to say on my wedding night, I was a virgin and I didn't have intercourse. And so would you say maybe in the Christian culture that's one of those things that, I don't know, does it perpetuate it? Does it throw fire on that? When someone's confused and they're like, I really want to be faithful, to what, to not have sex, not to break the rules. And this seems like a safe way to do that. And so we convince ourselves this is safe and a way to do that. Or even inside of a marriage, like I'm not actually cheating on my spouse because it's the internet. There's guys that are actually doing this and having affairs. So how would you say that notion kind of leads into people's lives? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. I think, and I hope I'm answering this. I think that's a great question. I think it's a hard one to answer, but I think what can happen early on is sexuality is scary to talk about. Sex is scary to talk about, and I don't know if it's a cultural thing that was happening all along the way, but I know in the 60s, the love culture, sex was, sort of highly touted, like, you got to be free. This is how you express yourself. And so I think the culture for Christians shifted in thinking of, hey, we need to, really move against this. This is not, God's design for it. But I think it maybe went a little too far, overcompensated, and I think it pushed away sex. So curiosity, I mean, sex is very powerful. Right? When it comes on board, it's like, what in the world is going on here? And to have no answer to that, I think is confusing.
That's helpful. You have anything else to add there, Sharon? On maybe the marriage side? On maybe like even the marriage side, on how we use this as like a deterrent, an excuse to that we're staying faithful to our spouse or things like that.
My experience with that is that happens a whole lot.
Yeah.
But what that says to me is there's something that is not being worked out between my spouse and me. And so I am going and taking care of myself with masturbation and porn, and I'm reducing that tension that I feel inside when that tension really has a purpose to say, hey, hun, things are not I need this to work on something because this isn't working for me. And so it stops me from doing what I need to do with my spouse. It kind of, it gives me a way out. And
I think that's a great thing to bring up too, because I don't think we realize how awkward sometimes or hard it can be to talk to your spouse about sex. And so it's almost like we feel uncomfortable, so it's kind of like you don't talk about it, but really it's like that's something you have to talk about. You don't just do it, you talk about it. So do you have any like advice or tips for marriages on how to bring it up or talk about it better?
I don't know that I do, but I do know that's one thing that porn does is porn does not have any talking about, it doesn't have any negotiation, it doesn't have any real tenderness in it. And so just watching porn tends to change my sexual script to something that is not tender and something where we don't talk. But I think it also comes from families. We grow up, a lot of times we don't know how to talk about sex.
Yeah.
And really it needs to be talked about, and kind of regularly. I mean, sex is a gift from God. And to be able to talk about it that way and its purpose and its place is important. But you're asking me about talking about sex in marriage. I don't know. I very highly recommend using I statements. It's when I come across as you're not doing this and you're not doing this and you're not giving me what I need, it feels like an attack, and it usually shuts the person down that I'm talking to. And so more of, hun, I've thought about this. I love you, but I really need us to work on this area of our life. And if you don't feel that way, I'm wondering are you experiencing some barriers that you need to talk about that would make this easier for you? So it's to make it a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot essentially about addiction, and you guys have kind of led into sex and all this, and led into maybe some of the things that lead behind not just I'm just watching porn, but people are getting addicted to this kind of stuff through the breadcrumbs and through how their brains are being rewired. So what would you say are just the underlying issues that lead to addiction in general, of things that we're trying to satisfy, or how do I become an addict? I don't think just obviously in the sex world, but there's a lot of ways to become an addict, and I think most of them are probably fueled by the same. We do different things to get our cope or get our high, but what are those fueled by that take someone to become an addict in something?
Yeah, there's a number of precursors, and Sharon can jump in at any point on this. I think one is attachment wounds, things that happen early on in life. That attachment is that feeling of warmth, right? That feeling of being seen, understood, known. I mean, we all have kids, and so at this moment, you can really see attachment at its finest, right? You can see the kids respond. When that's broken along the way, we're resourceful creatures, I guess, right? So we want to make that feel okay. We want to feel okay, and so what can happen is we run to that, like say sex or that deeper connection with someone, because we're trying to capture that attachment warmth that wasn't given to us. So that can be one of the precursors, which oftentimes is through trauma.
Yeah.
Right. So something along the way has been broken.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I think it's 2019, and so what we talked about this a little bit last week is like when I was a kid, if I wanted to go like look at porn, discover porn, like I had to go work for it, a little bit. Like it'd be like, hey, do I know a buddy that his dad has a stack of magazines somewhere that he found one day when he was trying to find 50 cents to go buy a pop, And so like you had to kind of work for it back then and dial up the internet, all those kind of things. But now it's like it's hunting you down. You had to hunt for it, and now it's hunting you down, which I think even more talks about why we need to talk to our kids about this. I got this book called Good Picture, Bad Pictures that I've got a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old that we've tried to just talk about this, normalize. There's things you're going to see, just whether we're walking in the mall at Victoria's Secret, there's just things that might pop up when you're watching YouTube Kids or whatever, to normalize. How do we talk about these weird things? Should my mom and dad not know about it, to take shame away and those kind of conversations? Would you say there's other, resources that you know about for parents in starting to have these conversations earlier and earlier? Because I think it's easy as a parent to be reactive and not proactive, but how can we be proactive parents? I had a guy last week saying this is one of his greatest fears is he's raising boys in a digital world, and he wants to protect his kids, but you also I don't have the choice if my kid uses an iPad in his classroom or not, and so he's becoming an addict even to technology, which could lead to a worse addiction. So any parenting tips you guys have?
Well, I'm sure there's lots of good books. Google's a wonderful search engine that might help, but I think it's just embrace the awkwardness of it. Just have those conversations with your kids. I think one thing that I grew up with is curiosity equaled shame. So the more curious I was about it, the more I felt like I'd get in trouble. So I didn't want to rock the boat there. So I went more, covert in my, search for it. And so I think it's just having those conversations. And I think like you're talking about with that reading material, just starting to say, this is God's design for these body parts. This is God's design for relationship. But again, embracing those questions, those curious things kids might say.
It's good.
I read a really good book. I hope I can remember the name of it. I think it's called How and When to Talk to Your Kids About Sex by Jones. I think that's right.
We'll Google it later.
Okay. But one of the points they made was to inoculate your kids against these things, because they're going to be coming into contact with them, which is what you were just talking about, Alex, is before you think they're going to come into, which is early, before you think they're going to hear about these things, you bring them up and you talk about them and you look for opportunities to bring them up. Kind of like an inoculation rather than coming in after the fact, after all their friends have laughed and enjoyed it and this is like fun, and they have no bank of information from which to draw.
That's good.
Well, I'm going to take us in a little bit of a different direction now. I just kind of want to talk about maybe going back to marriages and porn. I think a lot of times in marriages, you could watch porn together, and maybe makes it seem a little like, oh, we're doing it together. We're not hiding it from each other. We're just, it's not bad because we're doing it together, and it's helping us with our sex life. Do you guys think that's healthy? What is your take on that activity?
I've heard that before, and different people have different thoughts on it. I'm kind of thinking if I need porn to be able to have sex with my wife, something's wrong. Something's off there. To me, porn is about mechanics and trying to spice things up with mechanics rather than knowing and being known, which is, to me, what healthier sex is. It's about knowing and being known. In sex addiction circles, it's often thought that addicts substitute intensity for intimacy. And so healthy sex is not necessarily so intense as what you would see in porn or whatever, but it's more intimate, it's more knowing, and it's more comforting and loving. And so, some people think differently. That's how I think.
And I feel like even if you're doing it together, you probably have in the back of your head anyways, like, oh, we can't just have sex on our own. Like, we have to have something to help us. And that's probably not healthy anyways.
And I think that as you get older, and the wife's body gets older, and there you are looking at this porn. It's like constantly comparing. It's like, man, to me, it's a setup for problems, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on that, Nate?
Yeah, I think intimacy is, I think it's a deeper, it's deeper than that. Sex is an aspect of intimacy. And so if couples are just throwing all their problems into the same bucket, then I think they're in trouble. And so I think the answer might actually be, okay, there's a closeness that's broken a little bit here. How do we, how do we search that out instead of, okay, we have a problem, let's fix it in the bedroom.
Yeah. How about the guy or gal that's, we talked about this in Christian culture, that's single and waiting, and they want to stay faithful to Scripture. They want to stay faithful to not having sex outside of marriage. What would you say are healthy ways to, you can't just stop and block your sexual urges. They happen. They happen when you're watching a movie, flipping through a magazine. They just happen, I think, especially for guys. And I've never lived as a female, so I don't know exactly how that all works. But you can't just block them, So what would you say is a way, as like somebody that, man, they really want to be a high school student that's listening to this, that's glad we're having this conversation. They want to be faithful with all that they can. How do they live faithfully without porn? How do they fulfill those desires that are in their heart, those longings that God has wired in them, and stay faithful to this in a 2019 world? Any thoughts around that?
Obedience is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
Right. I think that there's resiliency that happens through that. And I think also, I think maybe a little bit of grace to say you're probably not going to do this perfectly. There's going to be times that you maybe mess up. And I remember being 15 or 16, and so I know the power it has. So my encouragement there would be more of, if it happens, it happens. Talk to someone, right? Don't live in isolation or shame over it, because that may empower it. But yeah, I don't know. I think that obedience piece is I think the biggest challenge.
Good. That's good.
And we talk a lot about, it's easy to associate these things with like guys struggling, but I also know that, there's been women in my life that I've talked with, and we struggle with that as well. Women do as well. And so you guys probably have clients that are females that come in and talk about this. What are some of the things they struggle with more? If women struggle with different things, maybe not porn, but more like something else that is a sexual addiction, is there anything that females struggle with differently?
I do have women that struggle with porn, but I think I have more women that struggle with wanting to feel loved. And that's that attachment one, probably from early on. And so it's like, how do we help you get in touch more with connection and feeling loved? And work on the, changing the behaviors that you want to change.
Yeah.
I think connection is a huge part of it, getting connected with people. And I'm still working on those, still coming up with ideas. I think shame is a huge part of it. And so it's working on that shame. How do we change your shame beliefs about yourself? Where did those shame beliefs come from?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about like shame. I think it is one of those things, and maybe unfortunately a byproduct of Christian culture, where we want to live by rules and we want to have standards, and then when we don't achieve those standards, when we screw up, when we fail, and we're not in a grace culture, how does shame really play a role for a man, for a woman in pornography and sex addiction, just addiction in general? How does shame, where's its place there? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think it's at the core of this. So it might be helpful to talk about. So guilt and shame are two things that feel very similar. One's probably has a little deeper of a root system. But guilt says I did a wrong thing, I did a bad thing. And shame says you're wrong. You're a wrong person. You're just not a good person. You're worthless, right? And so at the heart of that is this idea of, okay, if I'm worthless, if I'm a terrible person, then these thoughts are going to come up, these ways that I view myself and others. which basically says like I'm just my attempts here for relationship are going to be met with resistance. This isn't going to be a good thing, and what that can lead to is sort of this escape, this way to deal with the pain. And so that's where addiction can come in, as you start to become preoccupied with how can I feel that warmth, right? Unhealthy or not, I want to feel good. I want to feel sort of alive. And so that's where that addiction can come in, whether it's food, pornography, sex. There is a process to that, the cycle.
Good. So what do you do? You catch your spouse, or you suspect your spouse. You know, you were talking about you didn't find out for 20 years, but there were just things that were off in the relationship and things like that. So we'll start with spouse, and then we can maybe even jump into kid. Like, how do you go about having that conversation with your spouse? Like, if I go home, tonight, and I'm just flipping on my wife's phone and accidentally come across something, and like, what would Alex do in that kind of situation? How'd you say to like have that conversation in a graceful way, but also a way that actually leads to help and not shame and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's incredibly hard at first, for sure, because shame actually is highly correlated with addiction. Anything I do that is shaming is probably not helpful. Yeah. And yet, I just found this out. I'm so threatened. I have such fear. I'm angry. So it's, I don't know, there's a perfect thing there. But ideally, you bring it up with I statements. Hey, I found this on your phone. I'm confused. I don't know what's going on. Can you help me out? What's happening here? I think you start it without a condemning, more of a curious attitude than a condemning attitude, ideally.
You have other thoughts there, Nate?
Yeah, I would. What Sharon said's good. I think it is just simply ask the question, be curious about it, and just know there's people out there that can help. I think Alex in the last podcast you mentioned who's here to help, and there's just a lot of people that can really walk through a couple, walk with a couple through this. I mean, this is a really tough conversation to have, but I think the initial, you just ask the question, like, what's going on here? I'm confused. That's a good way to start it.
Do you guys do couples and do you do couple counseling with this and individual? Both of you do?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a great resource.
So just because you bring something up doesn't mean that a spouse is going to say, yeah, I'm doing this, or they can keep denying and denying. And so, but I know from my experience, I just kept praying, Lord, help me to be content, because I would bring things to my husband and say, look, this doesn't seem right. And he would kind of slough me off. And so I would just pray, Lord, help me to be content. Looking back, I think it would have been better for me to go talk to someone and find out how I could live my best life, even if my husband was not going to come around, how I could feel fulfilled and alive and walk out the life God wanted me to. So definitely talk to someone.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because we might address something in our marriage, but they might not respond the way we expect them to respond. They might continue to struggle with this or keep going through it and not want to quit doing it. So you have to figure out how to respond after that as well.
How you can live, yeah.
Yeah, and if we don't get to the heart of the issue, even if you put, Covenant Eyes or whatever software on your spouse's phone and you're just trying to have behavior modification, chances are if there's this thing that they need to feed, this unsatisfaction inside of their life that's built by shame, and you don't actually go in and do the surgery on whatever that thing is, then we're just going to replace it with another idol or another thing. I would assume that maybe it's not porn and you just, okay, this is all fixed, but then you fall into another thing.
So I would like to speak to that. Is that right?
Do it. We give you permission.
Yes. I'm assuming you're saying by behavior modification, you're saying working on stop doing the behavior.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And in my mind, the behavior is a symptom of a bigger problem. So I'm totally agreeing with you. If I just work on stop doing that behavior, but that behavior is a symptom of this shame and inability to communicate and resentments that I feel, then I'm just going to find something else to be addicted to. And so I think you're right. It's like we got to get to the core of it. We got to get to the shame, what's causing the shame. To me, shame beliefs are not what what Jesus says about us. And so part of it is believing what God says about us. And to me, I just use a shotgun approach for that. How can we change those beliefs in any way that seems good? One is by connecting with others. But one may be going back into trauma and healing some of that early trauma. Another is learning how to communicate in a safe way with my spouse. You have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that intimacy piece is huge.
Yeah.
Right. Behavior modification is great, actually. It will help. I think there needs to be a fence around the behavior because you're going to learn so much about yourself. I mean, it's going to be turbulent, right? All these emotions are going to come flying up that maybe you've been pushing and suppressing. And so you're going to experience them, and they're going to tell you a lot of things about yourself and what is going on at the core of who you are. And so you can't really get down there unless you start to listen to your emotional state and just pull the thread and follow.
That's right. So many addicts don't know what they feel. They have stuffed their emotions so much they don't know what they feel. And emotions give us information. They're very important.
That's good. I think last question before we wrap up today is just the how. How can I get help? And I think we've addressed this a little bit, but somebody's listening right now and they're like, whether they're 13 and they just discovered it and there's all these feelings and hormones and emotions. There's the 50-year-old guy that's steeped in this for 10 years and he's afraid to tell his wife because their relationship's going to fall apart, his job, everything's going to fall apart. How does someone get help? What are ways that they would contact you? What are some of those options?
Yeah, that's a great thought. So CityCare Counseling, I think website, phone number, you can get an appointment right online. That's a resource. I mean, MOI over here, one of the renewal groups. I mean, that's an outstanding group. It's one of the best, I think, support systems in town. And so, Christian or not, I think people get a lot of value from that group over there. But there are, I heard you say last week, pastors, yourself. I think that's great because I think someone needs to be like someone needs to catch that, right? When someone's vulnerable enough to take that risk, it's a short-lived, it's a small window. And so if someone has a 5-minute confidence boost, call somebody, get a hold of somebody, because someone can help kind of, I guess, widen that confident level.
Yeah. If you guys get an email about this, you're not like sending that to my wife or sending it to my job or sending it to my kids and my daycare. Like there's just laws and rules. Like if somebody messages you about this and has a conversation, they want to have an initial consultation or whatever, it's safe, right?
Yeah. So we're licensed professional counselors. And so we have some legal and ethical guidelines that keep you pretty safe, and so we're not we're spreading the word or saying well I'll email your wife and we'll set up a meeting. It's come in, let's get some help, let's figure out what's going on and build a plan for you. Right? A plan of attack, so to speak.
I think that's good because I don't think a lot of people they hear that kind of stuff, but I don't know that they know how serious that stuff is taken inside of conversations and client privilege and all those kind of things. So. Well, this has been great. I'm so grateful for both of you to come on and give us some of your time today. I'm prayerful that, not to add to your client load, but I'm prayerful that as trained people in this, that people will reach out either to us on whatever social media, that we can get in contact with you and that people find hope and healing in this situation that's really taboo inside of the church to talk about. And so thank you guys for what you do every single day to love people and to help them find freedom. Thanks for taking time to step on here and we'll see you guys soon. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Right, so Alex, Rachel, how do you feel that went? Was that at all uncomfortable for you to get through those those conversations with Nate and Sharon? I felt like there were certain topics where it's just like, I want to point out, Rachel, I thought you did an excellent job. You asked some really hard questions. And I don't know, how do you guys feel that went?
I think I didn't feel uncomfortable at all, which was kind of weird because it was a topic that can get really awkward, I think.
Yeah.
But I think it's just really important to talk about. So I was just really excited to actually get some of these things out in the open, because I have talked to so many friends who struggle with different things like this, and it's like they feel ashamed of it, or they don't want to talk about it to anybody, and like even them talking to me about it is awkward or uncomfortable or shameful. And I was excited to just kind of get these things out in the open so people can feel more comfortable to share. And they were awesome too at answering the questions. I just felt super comfortable asking them anything, because obviously this is their expertise, so they know a lot about this. So I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I think a lot about the way our brains process the information, and it's kind of like it almost made me think, I mean, not to just be dismissive about it, but it almost made me think of when you're training a dog and like you give them a treat and you make a sound or whatever, and it's just this habit that starts to form. And it's crazy that when you kind of strip everything down, like sometimes humans are a bit simple in the way, and we don't even realize that these things are happening. And I think Nate even mentioned how it can just lead to this dark path that people don't even see themselves ending up at.
Yeah, it's amazing how the brain is wired that way. Like, we've been doing stuff with our daughter, our 10-month-old daughter, figuring out, like, she's deaf, and figuring out like how to figure those things out, and can she hear, and she goes in like this sound booth, and like literally they're like at 10 months like wiring her brain to see like colors and react to colors if she hears sound and all that kind of stuff. So our brains, like, they're amazing. God's created them in an amazing way. One of the things that was just interesting, and I think almost sad, I alluded to this a little bit in the intro, was this is a prevalent struggle. I think nobody, is denying that this is a big deal in our society, but like that Nate is one of the only, in Omaha, a metro area like this, one of the only people with this kind of licensing and certification all the way to really deal with this. It's sad, in some ways to me, because there's obviously a caseload that's way bigger than that. And so
do you think that's because outside of the Christian community, do you think a lot of people just think it's not a problem?
Yeah,
like,
that's a great question.
Do you think it's just one of those things where, like, there was an experience that I would kind of was witnessed secondhand, and it was a young couple who got into they're a young married couple. They got into some trouble for a separate reason, but it came out that he had been watching pornography, and her response to it, like, aren't you upset about this and whatever? And she's like, oh, I knew he did it. Like, all guys do it, right?
Yeah.
And this was even within a Christian community, and it was just this almost apologetic, like, oh, that's just the way culture is. And I just wonder, like, is that maybe why when you hear something like that he's the only one in Omaha, is it because people think, oh, this is the least of our problems, or what? Like, what?
Yeah.
What is that?
I'd guess a lot of people don't see it as an addiction, or don't even see like the things that it can lead into, and so, somebody might be watching porn, but like I said, I think in the Christian community or outside of the Christian community, a lot of people watch it as like a maybe a morally okay thing, because they're like, I have a friend that one time was in a relationship, and then he was, talking to me about a gal that he knew. She was married, and he was like, dude, she's been messaging me, on Facebook and things like that. And they dated in high school, and she wasn't like finding, satisfaction in her marriage. And so it was kind of looking at him as like this side thing and trying to rekindle this. And he's like, no, I know it's not right, to do. And so he's like, I just find other ways to kind of get that fix. And so I think people don't realize in a broad way outside of Christianity what that could do, or like the ramifications that it could make to like a marriage or anything like that. And so I think we think about it as like a savior in some ways, like this is innocent, this is okay, because it's like it's in a digital space, and it's not actually ruining a relationship, or even like, I think texting or sexting, things like that, that are prevalent inside of, I think, high school relationships. A Nebraska football player or not on the team right now for like things like that he sent and all that kind of stuff, sharing what's legitimately like pornography. And so I think it's one of those gray areas in our society where there's digital space, and we're like, I'm not actually encroaching on a marriage. It's safe. We didn't actually hook up. We just, got our fix in another way. And so I think that's probably a landscape that we haven't had to deal with a lot because there's so much anonymity behind it. You can hide everything. There's privacy. There's ways around all this kind of stuff. And so I don't know. I think that's probably a lot of people don't see it, the ramifications of it.
Yeah.
I think also people probably don't see that there's an underlying thing that is leading to this problem. I think a lot of people are probably just like, oh, I'm doing this and this is bad. Let's, like we talked about, let's just have some behavior management going on here and kind of like get over that. But they don't realize, oh, you know what? There actually might be something underlying that is really just like leading to this and causing this. Let's get to the deeper thing here and figure out what that is. And people probably don't feel that way. So then why would you go see a therapist for that when you just need to, get it under control?
Yeah.
So
it's an industry. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so I think for people that are paying for a service, paying for something they want to see or experience, you feel like we exchanged goods. I paid for this service. This gal is getting paid on the other end from whatever way through the industry. And so I think people are like, what's wrong with that? I paid for it. I'm not stealing it. Obviously, people can steal it, all those kind of things. But I think for a lot of people, we can always find justification for what we're doing that feels maybe icky. And then the more we justify it, the better we feel. So there's things in my life, I do that with. I justify why I'm such a consumer and why I love the things that I love and why I always need the next thing because of filling voids in my life. And so, and I can always find excuses for buying that next thing or getting that next outfit or getting that next pair of shoes. I can always justify my wants and giving into my desires because that's just what I want to do. And so I follow those affections in my life. So
Mackenzie, you've been quiet over there.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to talk. Alex was talking.
Oh, jeez, Alex, shut up.
Typical. Just kidding. No, I was honestly just really moved by Sharon's story and just how she got into that profession. And I think I just felt a lot of hope in that because I think a lot of people have experienced hurt through this subject. And just to see somebody who has been so deeply wounded but has turned that around and used that for good for other people, there's so much hope in like just seeing God redeem that and God use something that was broken and using it for good in another person's life. I just think that's so cool. And yeah, I think that there's hope for people that have been wounded in this kind of situations, and that was just a great testimony of that.
And hopefully it's an encouragement for other people to start sharing their stories as well and kind of start getting this out in the open because that was an encouragement to everyone else to hear that that was something that she struggled with. And if we can be open with our struggles, it's going to encourage other people as well. So
yeah, so true.
Yeah, that's the same for Robert last week. I know even I've had a few people get to me on social media, thankful for his story, thankful for his willingness to come on here and share some of those things and being on the other side, talking about how he's not a perfect person even at this point, but having that connection to people and that empathy built and somebody that's failed, that's been, Robert, and I guess on his side, he was the one that failed, that messed up. And on Sharon's side, she was the one that was transgressed against. But both of them on both sides of the equation, there's hope for that type of person, which is so cool over the last 2 weeks to hear those two different stories and how that goes.
And I think one of the things that kind of keeps coming up is how we're handling these sorts of issues now versus how they've been handled in the past. And I think of the way that I was raised, and I think probably a lot of us, if you were raised in a Christian home, you didn't talk about sex at all. Like you didn't in any form. And you were kind of sheltered from that. And it was taboo, and it was one of those things that if something did happen, like in your life, it was terrifying to bring it up to your parents. Like it was so, like at least for me, I know, like if anything came to light that I had to confess or share, it was so scary. And I think as a parent, like looking, like I guess kind of just thinking about where these conversations have gone, like I so badly don't want that for my kids. Like I think, even as you look at like a heavenly father, earthly son type of relationship, you want to be able to go to God with these problems and not feel like he's just going to condemn you, but he's going to hear you out and try to help you with it. And I think like my wish for my kids is like, I don't I know that these things are going to enter their lives, like in one way or another, something's going to rear its head. And like, I so desperately don't want them to be afraid to talk to me about it. And I think in some ways that fear is almost greater in me than it is that they're going to discover something. Cause I think some of that maybe is a little inevitable because you can't helicopter that well, no matter what you do. Yeah. And so it's just like that fear of like, hey, am I doing everything I can to be outspoken and communicate clearly to them that I care and I want to hear if they're having problems and I want them to talk to me. Like, I think it's so hard to know, like, even because I think even my kids are young now, they're like 8 and 10, and it's still like confronting them about something they're doing. They're just like, they just lock up and they're like, I don't want to talk to dad. It's scary. And I'm like, what am I doing in my day-to-day life? Like in my parenting that because we do stuff without knowing it. Like our body language, the way we reprimand for little things, like we're communicating to them that it's not a safe place to share your wrongs with you. And so it's like, that was like just kind of a convicting moment for me where I'm just like, I've got to figure out how to make this stuff, not to normalize it, but like to make it a thing that's okay to share and to talk about. And I don't know. And
it's a huge mindset change for you. I mean, if you grow up in that and you've seen other people react that way, that's just your initial, like, your kid comes to you and says, hey, like my friends were telling me about, this like sex thing. Your face is going to just respond immediately because that's how
and they're going to see that and go, oh, don't talk to dad about that.
Say that. And so it's such a big mindset change, but it's just so necessary.
It's like, I think about when you remember when you're watching a movie with your parents and something like with my parents, it was like everything, like a curse word. Yes. I mean, I don't know, a thigh. I don't know. It could be anything, like any type of skin on screen, like anything could just be like, and I just feel my body tensing up like, oh, they probably like, and sometimes that would never lead to anything, or maybe it would just be an offhanded, why do they got to use that language or something? But it's just now, like, and then I've gone through most of my married life, and my wife and I were just kind of on a mutual like playing field. We understand what's kind of okay to bring into the house and what's not, and that's just kind of where we're at. But then when you introduce kids into it again, I'm like, wait, I'm feeling like I'm watching stuff with my parents again, but it's like I'm on the opposite side now, and it's so weird. Like, how do you build those bridges?
Yeah, and I think there was just such a response to the 60s and the sex revolution, and it was just everywhere that like, I think my parents, like I wouldn't criticize what they did by trying to shelter us, because I think they were doing it out of great heart and great intent.
And I hope I'm not trying to criticize.
I know. I remember specifically the movie Titanic. My heart will go on.
Paint me, Alex.
And I remember literally that movie, Titanic. I don't know if you guys watched it when you were kids, but we got like the Focus on the Family or some edition where they made it. It was 2 tapes long, but they made it without the paint scene, you know? And so, and that happens in so many movies too. And I remember my parents, because they loved us, they like got the, the scene without the lady just sprawled out being naked and painted, because there's 2 sides of that coin. There really was no need for that scene in the movie to make it a good historical movie. And so there was something I think people were appealing to inside of that. And that happens in so many movies. And so I remember like that moment, but I also remember like a curiosity like being built in me of like, oh, I wonder what that scene was all about. And I wonder if I have a friend that like has that scene. And so I don't remember specifically talking about it. And so how do I take those moments where that is happening in life and talk about it a little bit more?
The psychology behind all that too is like so interesting, because I think that things become taboo because our culture says it's taboo. And it's like, I think you look over into Europe and things like that, like at least female nudity is less taboo, I guess you would say. It's more prevalent in media and in commercials and that sort of thing. And you wonder, like, is that, like, I mean, if we were never allowed to show our feet in public, like, would that be like some sort of, I mean, obviously I know there are probably sexual problems with that already, but I'm just saying, like, would that be something that would be very taboo then, like, because toenails, I don't know. You just wonder, is it because of the way culture and what we've deemed inappropriate and like about our bodies? Because I think there is a certain aspect of God created our bodies. They're created in his image. Some may be more beautiful than others, but it's just one of those things where like, how do you separate the two, right? Because like, I think you can look at art that has nudity in it, and you can marvel at God's creation, but like, where do you separate that from lust and sexual deviancy?
Yeah, and don't look at a woman lustfully, or you've committed adultery in your own heart. Jesus talks about that, and so you're like, how do I do that, and what's it mean to have committed adultery in my heart, and where does that all land? And so it's a big topic. Obviously, I hope hearing from Sharon and Nate, and I think one of our hopes always as we're having these conversations is not to land on here's what you need to do, but I think this is one of those episodes where there is like, man, we really hope people take like a practical step. If this is something you're struggling with, or something you feel like your spouse is struggling with, if you're a high school kid, if you are someone who, like Sharon's husband, has been in a relationship for 20 years and never resolved this, and no matter what, living in the dark is not great. And so we want to let you know we are a resource. We've got a great resource of people that aren't just nice people, but people that are trained in this, that want to help you find freedom through Christ, help you find freedom through addiction and counseling that they have. And so if you reach out to any of us, on this subject, if you know me personally, or Mackenzie personally, or Rachel, or Eric, I know all of us would be willing to have that conversation, be a safe place, help get you plugged in to people that are professionals in this. And so I don't care if you live in New York City. Like, if this is a struggle, like I want to do what I can to at least
just don't send us your salsa.
Yeah, don't send us your salsa. I don't know what that means.
Every time
Not sure.
Remember those old Pace commercials?
No.
Or they'd sit around a campfire and they'd look at the salsa, and then they'd be like, New York City. Like, you're eating salsa made in New York City, and it's a bad thing.
We've officially digressed.
That's just where my brain went when you said that. It was just such a random call out. Like, if you're in New York City, that's where my head went. No, I think that's important though. I think it's important to reach out and talk to someone about it. Did anybody have anything else they wanted to add before we wrap this up? Kinsey, Rachel? No? We're good? We're good?
We're good.
Alex, do you have anything else? Sorry, I derailed your comment there. It was an important comment. You just said New York City, and man, my brain went to a commercial from when I was a kid.
It's good. No, I think just wanted to throw that out there, because there have been people that have reached out to me. I know Rachel mentioned people have reached out to her.
Yeah.
And so we're here. That's safe. We're not going to like share that with the rest of the world or anything like that. We're here on your team, and we want to keep having these conversations. So
yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening to another episode of Uncomfortable. If you want to reach out to us, you can send us an email at podcast@cccomaha.org, or on social media @cccomaha. And until next week, we'll see you then.